Thank you very much, and I'm very inspired by the conversations. I am, in the spirit of theological reflection, going to zoom out a bit. Part of my location experience has been in 4 or 5 intense contexts over the last 40 years, and combining those contexts through what amounts to a global view of the world in which, for instance, the Taiwanese people confront their imperatives for security, resilience, and self-protection. I have been kind of born out of participating in ecumenical actions for peace and justice and reconciliation in South Africa, Central America, South America, Palestine, as well as accompanying the processes in the Korean Peninsula and in Taiwan. And in this global perspective as well, from the World Council of Churches and from the World Communion of Reformed Churches, we have I think, understood the basic fact, talking about truth, is that the truth of the world in which we are in from a theological perspective is best perceived and only truly experienced from the perspective of the crucified, the sufferers, and the marginalized, those who are victims of empire. And I'll be drawing off of some of my previous writings in giving a kind of global perspective, and then making, in the end, one observation about Taiwan in a piece called Missio Dei, Peace and Reconciliation, Resistance to the Empire, and Koinonia with its victims. The thief does not come except to steal and to kill and to destroy. I have come that they may have life, and they may have it abundantly. John 10:10. An obvious starting point is everything that we do as churches is based on our relationship with the living God, on the mission that God has entrusted to us through Jesus. What we do is based on what was taught and lived in Jesus through his liberating power that leads us to peace and abundant life. Jesus, who we proclaim, is the life of the world. But this world in which Jesus' life is offered is a world of injustice without peace, a world where the largest part of the population faces great threats to existence. The basic truth of our life is we live in an ecumene wherein the structural, historical, economic, political, social reality is one of systemic and structural oppression, defended militarily, ideologically, culturally, and even religiously. Rabbi Abraham Heschel, a well-known American Jewish theologian and leader in the fight for civil rights in the United States, was fond of telling the story about what God is concerned about and what is priority for God. Heschel said that the first thing that God does every morning when God wakes up is to call the whole company of heaven together and ask them, where is it in my world that needs to be mended today? This understanding is our relationship with God is permeated with the obsession to mend the world and the understanding that the world is broken in its entire structure and form, and that God's presence is felt in the imperative to mend the world. In the Jewish tradition, this is called tikkun olam. The whole mission of God to act, to love, to redeem, to liberate, to heal, and to reconcile has to do with mending and repairing the world from the brokenness of death for a vibrant creation with abundant life. The mission God entrusts to us, as revealed in Jesus Christ, must focus on what we do to share God's obsession with mending the world. As Isaiah 58:12 reads, and you shall be called the repairer of the breach, the restorer of streets to dwell in. This urgent focus for mission in this perspective is emphasized within the ecumenical community. And each of us, as part of communities that are afflicted by threats to life, by dominant military powers, understand ourselves to be located within which the mission statement of the World Council of Churches in 2012, called Together Towards Life, Mission and Evangelization in Changing Contexts, affirms that the objective of God's mission is the fullness of life, and this is the criterion of discernment in the mission. Therefore, we are called to discern the Spirit of God wherever life is in abundance, particularly in the form of liberation for oppressed people, as well as healing and reconciliation for fractured communities, and the restoration of all creation. We are urged to value the Spirit and the Spirit's presence in the different cultures that affirm life, and to be in solidarity with those who participate in the mission of affirming and preserving life. Therefore, we must discern and confront evil spirits wherever the forces of death and denial of life are at work. This affirmation of life is our fundamental mission principle. And it means, although we feel threatened and understand deeply present military danger, we must flip always our mission imperatives to ask, are the actions that we take in response to that which threaten us actions that will in fact increase life rather than fall into the logic of death? Are we falling into a repeating system where we meet death with death? Or are we, through the Spirit and power of the resurrection, able to enter through God's Spirit in imagining new realities that simply don't mean meeting military force with military reaction? We affirm that marginalized people, says the document, are mission agents and exercise a prophetic function that highlights the fullness of life for everybody. Those who are marginalized from society are the main partners in God's mission. We have to listen to the voices from the margin that express what affirms life and what destroys it. We must direct our mission towards the actions carried out by marginalized people. Justice, solidarity, and inclusion are key expressions of the mission from the margins. So this declaration includes a clear condemnation of economic injustice, saying that God's economy is based on the values of love and justice for everybody, and the transformative mission is opposed to the idolatry of the free market system. In fact, we understand, therefore, that economic, ecological, gender injustice, all of these structures of oppression in a world where all of the contexts, for instance, that I talked about are situations where the more there has been the recourse to the so-called promotion of democracies by the great empires, or the lending a helping hand by empires, whether it be Russia, the United States, or China, has in fact deepened within the countries who are supposedly the beneficiaries of empire's kindness, deepening economic and ecological injustice and cultural marginalization. In fact, the truth of what's going on in our world must be understood through the eyes of those who are marginalized and afflicted by empire. That the impulse of the community is not only to defend ourselves, but to defend the greater prospect of life, to create new forms of solidarity across and among contexts where it's those who are the poorest, the most marginalized, the most afflicted, in fact, the crucified, who guide us forward. When we are guided by everything we do in the mission that God has entrusted to us, we leave our comfort zones and try to imagine new realities that where our coming together leads us to a reading of the signs of the times from the context. I'm not going to, because of time, go into all the reality, but let's say we know that the readings of the signs of the times is in fact our biblical theological understanding of elements. So we talk a lot about disinformation, cognitive warfare. It leads to the question that from the point of view of the gospel, how do we discern this truth that will set us free? And one of the truths that repeatedly comes through the gospel and through the long trajectory of biblical narrative is the epistemological privilege of the oppressed. If we want to know if a society is doing well, says the prophets, we look to the treatment of the foreigner, the widow, the orphan. If we seek to understand the core of God's mission, we look to whether the poor are being lifted up, whether the prisoners are being liberated, whether the hungry are being fed. In an African folk idiom, it is simply said, if you want to know the truth about a cat, you ask the mouse. We have to take, therefore, an understanding of looking all our peoples, not only from the logic of how our nations are pretending to defend themselves in terms of empire, but understand that there has always been a clamor of the people to side with the empire which we think will most defend us. And the biblical view continually comes back with a rejection of this military logic and says, in fact, to trust in God is to invest in justice from below, to make new forms of solidarity with the most oppressed, not to give our trust to leaders and military leaders. In Hosea 7, 11, 13, talking about one of the tribes of Israel, it says, Ephraim is also like a silly dove, a pigeon without senses. First they fly to Egypt, and then they call to Assyria, and wherever they go looking for help, but I will chasten them, seeking the recourse of military logic, or hoping that there will be a king that will save us, that the military route is the route to redemption of the people and will set us straight, is against the radical logic of the radical, I have a cold, the radical positioning of the gospel. I have 2 minutes left and a lot more to say, but we are called to be creative and to think. In many places in the world and other moments of the Cold War, people from below, when they talk about mobilization and civil defense, did things like create, where they were literally under attack by two opposing forces, humanitarian sanctuary, where the church created no war zones, where no armed actors were allowed. There are sanctuary cities where migrants are safe and protected from everybody. There are countries in things like the Third Country Initiative, way back in the Cold War, which sought to say we will be a country that will align with nobody except other countries that are trying to pursue negotiated solutions, seeking economic justice, refusing ecological destruction. We have to have imaginaries that go beyond the belief that our security will be found in recourse to one empire to save us from the other. Negotiated solutions, taking the oxygen out of the temptation to imagine that more arms sales, more funding, take away from the myth that these imperial wars are based on virtue rather than dominance and imposition. Always stop expansion. No more NATO expansion. No more Chinese expansion. No more Russian expansion. No military solutions. Because the basic criteria is to do that which flourishes life. And how do we know we're on track? We are taking our lead from those who are the most afflicted, the crucified, who call out for justice, peace, and reconciliation to build the world that God has promised us. I think I'm just slightly over, Professor Chen.